Welcome to Rebuilding Careers. My name is Bonni Pomush. It is my honor to serve as the CEO of Working Wardrobes. And I am joined here today by Mayor Farrah from Irvine. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Bonni. It's great to be here.
Oh, Mayor, I think we all see you everywhere. We know your face, but what we don't know always, and maybe some of us do, but I certainly don't. What is your background? Who have you been kind of growing up? Where did you come like into this moment that we all know you in? Took a lot of years to build, and I'm curious, how your background is, probably comparable in more ways than we would assume to each of our own. So would you mind getting us started by sharing with us about you, your background? How'd you grow up? How'd you even get here?
Sure. It was not even a linear path like many people, lots of ups and downs. But I did grow up in the the city of San Francisco, up until high school. And then we moved to the East Bay. So we were in San Pablo, right next to Berkeley. And that's where I went to high school and went to UC Davis for college. Did English literature, and then my mom kept telling me, how is that going to pay for bills? Because I wanted to write, and so I ended up doing a lot of work in microbiology. I ended up not doing the double major route. It was just going to take too long, and so I had all this coursework in microbiology, but I do have my degree in English literature, and so went out looking for a job and ended up getting hired as an auditor, a quality assurance auditor at a biotech company, where really it was report writing. So I got to write a lot, not the fictional stuff I wanted to write, but more of the scientific stuff. So it was definitely different. But from there, I moved on up, and different companies. Ended up, after 9 years, being a regulatory affairs manager for a biotech company out in Emeryville. And then, come 2003, 2004, my husband had an opportunity to start his own business, which led him to Southern California. And so we were looking for where to move, where to go. At the time, I had two little boys that were 1 and 3. And so we ended up being in Irvine on recommendation from family and friends. And I've been here ever since.
Wow. So the mommy of a 1 and 3-year-old arrives. I'm curious, and you gave us a little bit of a glimpse into your mom and practical answers, like, so how are you going to make money? What was your childhood like?
We were 3 sisters. I'm the oldest of 3. And my childhood was really not just being a child, but I was also a translator for my mom because she didn't speak fluent English. So if we were going to parent-teacher conferences or even going to the DMV, stuff like that. So I found myself being that translator for her until she was able to, take some classes and find her way. And so, it was a balance. And sometimes I would be like, oh, why do I have to do that job? But, it's important for us to understand that sometimes it takes all of us doing our part to get to where we need to be. And I'm just so thankful of that opportunity. I didn't think of it back then as an opportunity, but I definitely think of it as now as an opportunity because it gave me an idea of the different types of families, the different types of communities, the different types of needs we have. Not everyone is speaking English and understanding English. So how do we make sure that we communicate with them? That's always on the back of my mind, especially in my role now is making sure that when people are being handed paperwork, are they even getting it? Are they understanding it? How can we translate it, make it easier for them to understand what they're being presented with?
You're so spot on, Mayor. And we talk about this always as barriers. Like there are barriers in between the folks that we have the honor and privilege of serving at Working Wardrobes, between them, where they are now, and where that career goal is. And language can certainly be a barrier, comprehension, and sometimes just kind of going through, we use this vernacular of jumping through hoops, right? But there's just a certain process that you have to go through, and that steps in that process can be each and every one of them their own barrier.
Absolutely.
how amazing too that, I mean, maybe it wasn't your first like paycheck story, but that you describe your first job as serving as translator and helping your mom overcome barriers on her journey. That's beautiful roots. And also, like you said, this empathy was really built into you to understand that her experience was very dependent on you.
Exactly.
And over time, I'm sure that that's changed as well. But wow, what was your actual first job where you got an actual paycheck?
My first job was at a community park. I worked for the Parks and Recreation of San Pablo, and it was for an after school program. So after school, I would come home, put on my Parks t-shirt, walk over to the park that I needed to be at, and do after school activities with the kids. Anywhere from sports to crafts, really being that person that would occupy, and entertain these kids until their parents got home in the evening. So, it would be sometimes around 6 p.m. that we would end our programming. And it was incredible as a high schooler myself to be with these elementary school kids that didn't want anyone telling them what to do and trying to get them to play organized sports. You'd be like, all right, we're going to play baseball today. And then you got two running away going, oh, I'm going to play soccer. And you're like, wait. And so it really, it's the different personalities and the different views. Everything that I ever did in my life that I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to get out of this was a opportunity for me that I now look back on and like, I got to, work with different personalities at such a young age. And that really helped me. So one thing that I think that didn't even hit me until like now recently was that we, as we're growing older and we're experiencing all these ups and downs, we kind of set aside, I know I did, set aside all those things that we're learning along the way, that later on in life, we were like, I actually know how to do this because of my experience back then when I was like 15, 16. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that, I wish I would have realized earlier, but I realize it now.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I often talk about this. It's like life is these puzzle pieces that you can't really see the whole image until you understand why you needed to understand and learn that skill or have that experience. And then all of a sudden the puzzle pieces kind of reveal that if it wasn't for this, then that, and then that. And interesting too, and I think you were starting to make this connection. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it because it sounds like you really learned lessons even in that first paycheck story, in that first job with the rec department that you're using today. I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about, like how are you making a living today and contributing some of those puzzle pieces in your everyday work now?
So, my everyday work is being the mayor. And it's dealing with a wide variety of personalities and needs and issues that pop up. And I think the important part is for me to understand that not everyone has the same story. Not everyone has the same needs. And not everyone is going to speak up. And so, I remember like some of the quiet kids in the corner and me having to go to them and say, okay, come on, I'm going to bring you in and then have you play. I'll stand next to you and teach you if you don't know how to play. But that's the same thing in adulthood is you're going to have people that just don't know how to come forward or get the resources they need. So you have to be out there sharing those resources and saying to them, hey, I've got things for you that I think you need. Here's how to get them. And that's the proactive way of doing things. It's not just waiting for someone to come to you. It's you've got to be out and about. And I know you mentioned that I'm out and about in the community. And that's really why, because I learn so much when I'm outside than I do sitting in the office.
There's a real sensitivity that I'm hearing, and that sensitivity about we are all humans and no two humans have the same experience or the same background or the same way of looking at things. And yet we have this shared experience in our humanity of creating community and being and participating in community. What a healing place community can be. And yet it can also be a place where we are challenged and trying to solve problems together that may not be affecting us individually, but affect us communally.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll come right back. It has already been so magnificent to talk with you, Mayor Khan. And this is an episode of Rebuilding Careers. We will be right back after this message.
We all know someone who's out of work. Hundreds of thousands are unemployed in Southern California. Working Wardrobes is here to help. At no cost to you, our career coaches will get you job ready. The time is now. Time to update your resume. Time to practice interview skills, time to get job training, and time to learn new skills. It doesn't cost you a thing, but it can change your life. This is your time. Call Working Wardrobes at 714-210-2460. Speak with a career coach today.
We are back on this episode of Rebuilding Careers. I'm Bonni Pomush, joined here by Mayor Farrah Khan. Mayor Farrah Khan. That was like one word. It kind of gave you a new name. How did you like that? So
That's
you were
awesome.
just you were just talking before our break about really how we create community and address the individuals in our community. And I think oftentimes, especially in our work at Working Wardrobes, that we have this opportunity to really enter a sacred space with people. And the space that we usually get to enter with people is sort of a vulnerable place when people are asking for help and they're saying, I need help. There's something in between me and the power of that paycheck. Will you please help me? And whether it's a gap in knowledge or skills, experience, how to represent oneself, how to make sure that the resume, the paper represents my strengths and my abilities, and then tailor that to particular positions, etc. Each of those are little micro movements that are overcoming barriers between a person and gainful employment. And you have talked about a few examples already in our conversation about overcoming barriers, whether it's language or process, whether it's, learning how to play together or follow directions or just to say yes. So I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing, and I'm asking you to be a little bit vulnerable with us. But Mayor, would you share with us a time or an example of a barrier or an obstacle in your life that you've overcome? Like, what was the barrier and how did you overcome it?
I think the most relevant right now is me even getting into office. It was not something that I was looking at doing anytime in my life. My career has shifted from corporate to small business to nonprofit, but it was never political. And it wasn't because I just never saw myself in this position. And what happened, in 2014 was that, I was sitting in a gathering of people, and there was a candidate that was running for office, and her husband as well. And I brought up the fact that, when I look at people in office, I don't see people like me. And I thought that, there was a need for there to be more diversity, more women in office, more diverse people in office. And his response to me was, well, I hope you're not thinking about running. And I said, I'm not, but why not? And he said, because people like you with names like yours are unelectable. And I kind of stared at him and no one in the room said anything. And so I drove home just reliving that moment over and over again, trying to understand why. Like, how does someone in 2014 make that comment and no one says anything? Like, no, that's not true. And it just didn't sit well with me. And so at that time, it really bothered me. And I was talking to my husband, and I was talking to my friends. And at the end of it, I think it went from just being in shock to not understanding to a little bit of anger. Like, who are you to say that? And that, I think, just kind of propelled me into, then maybe I do want to have that seat. Maybe I do want to be the one that runs, and maybe I do want my name out there. And so that's what happened. I decided in 2016 to run for Irvine City Council. And again, it's not an easy path. It's a lot of learning, And I learned along the way. I didn't win in 2016, but I think I came up high enough where people started to recognize, what I was talking about, the issues that I was bringing up, and that, I was walking in the community, getting to know our residents and our businesses. And so I ended up running again in 2018, and I was the highest vote getter at that time. And it really goes to show that, throughout our lives, whether it be in our careers or in general life, there's going to be folks that are closing the door on us. But it takes really just not ourselves, but it takes people around us to help us overcome and reopen those doors, or even break them down at some certain times to get to where we need to be. And I never thought that, that council seat would lead to a mayoral position and then getting reelected. But then I see the changes and all the progress we've made in our city, and it's just something I'm very proud of.
That's amazing. From someone with a name like yours, I mean, I can't even imagine hearing the comments, but I can also see the work that you're talking about in the city. We've done a lot of work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging over the last several years. And that this is an example where I hope, if you heard that statement again, I hope you never hear that statement again. But if you did, I would hope that you would have a cadre of people in the room that were allies.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I see it now. I mean, in the past few years, this whole DEI movement, not just in politics, but in businesses and education, is really there because people like me have stood up and said, well, that doesn't make sense. So we need to change the way we think. We need to change the way we present ourselves and what we're projecting out into the community.
Well, yes, all of that. And I think there's like an invitation to curiosity. And I think like when I think about what's the moral of the DEI story, the story is to ask and to hear and to understand and learn about each other's stories, and to not assume or take for granted that my experience was just like yours, because it's very, very unlikely that it was.
Right. Exactly. Well, it's making sure that we are good listeners and able to take in what others are sharing and be respectful of it.
Right? That this can coexist. And it's interesting because I often have this conversation that, part of the educational cycle, the age and the development of our brains requires that we categorize, right? It requires that we understand this or that. But that there's a time when we need to adapt and learn thinking that is adding and accumulating to that knowledge, which is that there can be both and that things don't need to only live in one bucket, that they can be in multiples. And there's a lot of work us humans have to do to continue to discover with curiosity each other and so much of this human experience.
Oh, absolutely.
There's something that you touched on that I want to dive a little bit deeper into, and I want you to know why I'm asking before I ask you. And the reason I'm asking is because I want our listeners, whether they are at the peak of their career, at the beginning of their career, reinventing, finding new, whatever the circumstance is, my question is, if you were to start over and rebuild your career, what advice would you give, maybe to yourself, maybe to someone else that is doing that kind of a start over? And I'm really thinking, of course, selfishly about the clients we serve who are from just a huge swath of life and experiences. How would you advise they restart?
First is don't be afraid. When I moved from Northern California to Southern, I didn't have my corporate job anymore. And I was really afraid to do anything because that's all I knew. But I would say don't be afraid and don't limit yourself. We as human beings are capable of doing so much more than we give ourselves credit for. Network, get to know people, get to know what your interests are, find what you're passionate about, and move forward. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to even ask people if they have job openings. One of the things that I think that I didn't do during my transition time was, as I was meeting people, I never asked them like, oh, so, what's available? What, there's no harm in asking, because then that's how you find out what's out there and what's available. So then you can then hone yourself to apply for it. And I think just having that openness of confidence of knowing that you are needed somewhere and finding that someplace that you're going to be the great fit for.
Oh, that's really beautiful. Like to enter that with a knowingness that you're going to land where you need to be, that your gifts and talents will be given. It's just a matter of finding where and in what way.
Right.
And also this idea of the possibilities. You were not even considering a career in politics, and yet that possibility came to you, and here you are. That's incredible.
And be open. I say that especially to our youth right now, that I think feel that they have to pick a career now and live through it. And I tell them, look, I've changed careers like 3 or 4 times in my lifetime. And it's okay. It's okay to drop something and rebuild yourself up. Sure, it takes time. Sure, it might be unstable. But at the end of the day, you'll be better off knowing that you're going in a path that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, the beauty of health and aging well is that they'll have more years to do it. So even if it's a 20-year career, you could have 2 or 3 of those. I mean, that's possible.
Exactly.
I think it's a very vulnerable act, to ask for help. And the way that you presented asking for help felt a little bit like more comfortable to me. And I really appreciate that. I'd like to learn more. I'd like to know more about, and then this sort of closing question of, and do you have any openings that I could consider? Really great wisdom.
It's so important for, folks to be able to have those conversations, but know that if they're there for a specific reason, if they're looking for that job, they've got to ask about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we're back to those puzzle pieces, right? Because you just never quite know which one's going to be the next big add to your story. Well, I don't want this conversation to end, but I'm going to ask you one last question, if you will, before we part. And that is, do you have any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners, our clients, people in our community who are listening to you and really, I think, inspired by your example?
I think one of the things that we don't do well, and I know I did not do well with myself, is to believe in ourselves. It's to believe that we are capable of doing and achieving. It's so important. Before we expect others to believe in ourselves, it's important for us to believe in ourselves. So give yourself credit and give yourself the love that you need to move on and to accomplish all the goals that you have.
Oh my goodness, that is the most beautiful message, and I'm hearing it and taking it very much to heart. Thank you so much, Mayor Khan, for coming not only to the table with your openness and your loving spirit for community and the individuals who create it, but also for taking this time to help uplift us and give us these morsels of wisdom that you have accumulated so far in your journey.
Thank you.
Yes. This has been another episode of Rebuilding Careers. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad you're here. And thank you again to Mayor Khan for joining us.